Hello, my delicious co-creators. Lilou here in beautiful Sedona with a person you certainly recognize, most probably because you have actually been living here in Sedona for 27 years and your albums have been going wild on the internet, especially connected to the whole spiritual community, and you are well known. You're actually well known.
I'm about as well known in Sedona as Bell Rock is right now. Everybody knows me, but welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's such a delight to be in this beautiful city and connect to human beings that are on this path. You know, it feels great as another human being to meet that. And I know you're all about inspiration, and this is what this conversation really today is about. I want to find out what you mean by inspiration and what are your views on life and how you see this big universe. These are big conversations that I'm personally so curious. I love having these conversations, and I know a lot of co-creators watching this are we're filling ourselves up with this light, with this love. It's beyond the words here, isn't it? You're a musician. How do you say composer?
Composer, recording artist, and now facilitator of workshops, writer. I do a number of things.
You're creative.
Whatever is creative. I do the laundry creatively.
You love that.
I love anything creative. And anything can be creative.
Yes.
Just depends on how we see it.
It's interesting, just on an energetic level. You seem very balanced. The feminine, the masculine energy seems very balanced in you. Do you have that sense?
I do. The creative process is very much the feminine. It's an allowing. It's a surrender. Yeah. On the other hand, I have a very logical mind. And so it's a balance between my male and female. Sometimes my male takes over, like when I'm perturbed, angry, or have a very serious question in life that I can't figure out or can't feel my way through. I use the machine. And so I like to do both.
And you have Greek origins?
100%.
Wow. Okay, so we've got a Greek god here, ladies. I know Chris is very popular with the ladies. So anyway, let's go to this conversation about the inspiration. What do you mean? What inspires you in life?
Well, I've been inspired since I was a child. My mother encouraged me to always, and all of us, we had 3 of us in the family, always encouraged anything artistic, anything creative. So there was never blocked. And I say that because I feel everyone's an artist, and every human being, every being everywhere is creative. The planet's creative. The trees that we're looking at are creative. And people seem to think that some people are creative and some people aren't, but that's impossible. Because creativity is not what we do, it's who we are. We are creativity in action in every moment. And so for me, inspiration is tapping into the life force. It isn't just art. You know, I said once upon a time, and it comes back to me many times, that if I did not learn from my art the process of creation and not apply it to my life, I'd really be missing something. Yeah. So I don't try, it comes naturally. But I realize that every moment is an opportunity to create something. Every moment. And we do. Yeah. And lately, and I'm going to go a little ahead here, just the last couple of weeks, I've started to push identification from even my creative mind, which is very free, to really like the universal mind. We are all the mind of God. All of us are. Yeah. And every time we perceive, every time we imagine, we're creating an entire universe. We're not just creating a song or not just creating a poem. We're creating every moment that we experience. It's our creation. It's here through our vehicle. Yeah. Yeah.
It takes us to a whole other level when we see it that big, when we see that big picture.
Well, identification is a problem on the planet because I believe we will never know who we are. People want to find out who they are. So we play games with our egos, and so we create a crystallized identity, and then we spend our lives trying to support that identity. But that identity is always going to be limited. You know, it's wearing the mask. It's our story. It's based on our past. But to truly be in the creative process, you have to surrender the self. And I know that's not something that I'm saying originally, but having been a creative for so long, I am intimately involved in that process all the time. Yeah. And so the more I apply that to my life, the more I understand that I'm creating this. I created you to come here and show up at that moment, and created you to be here now, and created this experience together. It's somehow the universal will put it together through me, through you, and we created this.
There's some things obviously that were experienced that seem unconscious or that we didn't speak out, that we didn't intend, and yet we're living them. So what's your view on that whole relationship between destiny, things that are already planned, free will, etc.?
Right. Well, that is a very loaded question. Okay, do you have a few hours for that one?
We do, don't we?
Well, let me start with free will, because that's one of my favorite things to talk about. Because my definition of free will, I think, is somewhat original. To me, the definition of free will is when you no longer need to have a will. When you surrender your need to have a will, you allow the greater will to work through you, and then you're free. So it's a real different way to look at it. I mean, in this country, America's based on individuality, and America's based on performance, and America's based on success, and America's based on choice and big free will. I mean, our whole country is based on that. You know, the American dream is all about that. But really, that's just our very small identified selves that do that. It's our very, you know, people call it the ego. I don't know, that seems to be kind of a negative connotation, because our egos are useful. And I certainly experienced plenty of my own at times. But really, the most beautiful thing is that phrase that keeps coming to me when it's in the Bible somewhere. I'm not very good at this, but, you know, thy will, not mine. Mm-hmm. And thy, but what's interesting, because thy is really everything's will. It's not someone else's, not something else's. It's the will of all being. It's the will, it's the life force.
The universal.
Universal will, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, the universal mind. And so as I become less enchanted with my personal self, which there's always a dead end there somewhere, even if it's the moment you die and you look back on your life and you go, well, the best I did was create a character that I tried to convince myself and other people that I was. But when you come to meet your moment, that's not really going to sustain you. And when you surrender in your life, surrendering to your next phase, you know, when you reach the end of this particular journey, it's natural. You're ready. It's like, I surrendered to the greatest will there is, and that's just what comes naturally to me.
Yeah. How do you get to this place, or what was the shift, the turning point for you? Because a lot of musicians get caught and have a big ego. And I think it is, and a lot of human beings do have, which prevents for us to experience more of life and surrendering and really living truly our life's mission to the fullest. So how did you ever went like one way, and then all of a sudden you thought, oh my God, I'm really being this person, and there's something else for me to experiment?
I'm not one of those that went too far overboard. You know, I never got drug addicted or, you know, groupies all over. I didn't go to that place. And I also never congratulated myself unnecessarily for my successes. However, when you're in the public eye, what they reinforce in you are your accomplishments. And some people feel your essence in your work or in your presence, but most people look at you as the look, the records, the music, the glamour of being a recording artist, the glamour of anyone who I've inspired coming back and going, oh my God, you're Chris Spheeris. And I'm like...
And there's a pedestal and the gap that starts.
But I think the answer to your question is the beauty of disenchantment, because I think it's healthy to live through these things. It's healthy to have anything that you dream of, because it helps you see what you want and what you don't want. So when I dreamed of being a creative person, I wanted to be a musician at some point. I wanted a certain amount of success. Of course, it's always nice to have women in my life. I wanted to have things, and at a certain point, I had enough of those to realize that, okay, that's enough. Now what? And then I went through actually a period of disenchantment, a very humbling period where my spirit just sort of toned everything down. And I stopped recording for a number.
How long was that?
Around the year 2000. Yeah, I just stopped recording. And since then, the music business has changed dramatically, because I'm not a regularly performing artist like a lot of musicians are. I'm a recording artist. I do my art in the studio, and I create recorded pieces. And unfortunately, for musicians at this time, there's not a lot of compensation for recorded music unless you're very, very well known. So it changed my economic structure, which to my ego put me into somewhat amount of stress. But then my creative self came over and had to find another way to survive, another way to make a living. Right?
Beautiful. That's such a process. I feel a lot of human beings, and most of us, I'm going to even say, have to go through to step in the unknown and just do what feels right inside. You took off those videos from YouTube. You took off for some reason. You know, this takes courage. I mean, this is here we're at the core of what it takes to really live someone's dream. If you had that creativity that starts flowing after that, as you said. So that's very interesting, that process of, okay, this is not the way I want to go. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to go, but this is what I need to do. And there we go. The divine starts flowing in.
Well, here's what was beautiful about the process I went through. I use the word disenchantment again because after I had reached a certain amount of success, I sold a couple million records. I had some success on the charts, but the New Age charts and all of that. At that time, it was kind of a big deal to be driving in LA and hear my song on the radio, or two of my songs on the radio. Anyway, when things calmed down in about the year 2000 and everything in my life just seemed to turn the volume down, I started to develop a renewed sense of humility. Like I said, I was never overboard with my ego, but that actually brought me to a much quieter place inside of me, which allowed me to hear my nature better. Yeah. I didn't have the distractions. Yeah. And I have a very strong spirit, so I know it's guiding me to my optimal expression, optimized. I love to use the word optimized. Mm-hmm. So as things got quieter inside of me, my ego had to go through a lot of hits, but inside I kept getting quieter and quieter and expecting less and less, to where all of a sudden the threshold of hearing my nature came above that, and I started to feel new motion. And I said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to perform simple concerts by myself. I'm going to read poetry. I'm going to tell stories. And then several years later, I had the inspiration to start doing workshops.
It's nearly a rebirth, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was. There was definitely a death of many things. So there's a whole phoenix thing going on there.
Yeah. So what do you do in your workshop? Is it does it get into the singing, the creation, the dancing?
It's not about music at all, actually. My workshops are based on the premise that we are all by nature creative. Creativity is not what we do; it's who we are. So, first thing I have to do is talk about identity. Because if I use the word I want people to know who I'm referring to. So if I'm referring to Chris Spheeris, the musician, that's why I never tell my backstory. I just show up. I don't say, hi, I'm Chris Spheeris. I don't do any of that. I mean, they probably know from the flyers, but what I do is I talk about what is our nature as a vehicle of creation. And I work through a lot of logic in terms of how did I go through my life trying to find not only who I was, but where I was. Because I went through a very rigorous process of trying to find out where I was. I started here because that's sort of the archaic version of where we are, because we hear our thoughts in our head and we think that we're centered here. And then I went to my feelings and realized, okay, I'm not just here. And then I went to all my feelings, realized I am in my entire body. And then I started thinking, well, no, because I'm empathic and I'm telepathic, as everybody is. So we are extensions of our environment too. And then biologically, our skin is breathing, we're constantly taking in oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide. I mean, it's all very sensible to think that we are integrally involved with our environment. We can't exist separate. Yeah. Spiritually, physically, biologically, none of it can happen. And then I go a little further and I talk about something Ramana Maharshi said, which sticks into my mind, and the story is something like this. They say he became enlightened, or whatever you want to call that word, awakened as a teenager by asking a simple question: who is the thinker who's having these thoughts? Mm-hmm. When I read that, I closed the book, never read another word, and it literally blew my mind. Mm. I mean, it wasn't like the pivotal moment of my life, but I needed to hear that at that time. Because now I ask people the question, when you make a choice, where does that choice originate? When you have a thought, where does that thought originate? Did you know you were going to have that thought? When you're in conversation, do you know the next thing you're going to say? Mm-hmm. If you don't know these things, how can you possibly feel like you're in control of them? You can only control them as they come out. Or you can filter in your mind right before you say something, but then you're not being real, you're not being present. Mm-hmm. But if you let yourself go in an inspired conversation or in any sort of inspired act, you don't really know what's going to happen next. And that, to me, is the adventure of life. That, to me, is where enthusiasm is. Mystery is a lost commodity in our world because people want to be certain about things. They want to have their security, they want to have their money, they want to enclose themselves with houses and cars and all these enclosures. People just want to enclose themselves. They feel safe that way.
Like it's the Jews.
Well, yes, and there's nothing wrong with self-expression. There's nothing wrong with having things. But it's the identification and the attachment to those that keep us from constantly realizing that we're a creative process, and in order to truly live, we have to allow ourselves to die.
Yeah. So you take it really a step further. It's not just being in the unknown, stepping in the unknown. It's really being in the unknown until there's something that comes out of us, expressing itself.
I can give you a simple example. A lot of teachers, instructors, they talk about meditation. And the idea of meditation is to quiet your mind. And from that, you tap into a greater mind, the universal mind. You have visions, you have inspirations, things come up. So if we're able to quiet ourselves in our lives, then we're able to hear that voice. If our lives are filled with distraction, we don't know what our nature is anymore. We're up here trying to figure it all out as if it was some sort of a crossword puzzle, but it's not that at all, because true life and true inspiration and true creativity are completely effortless. It's like nature. Nature is effortless.
How do you hear it? Tell us about that voice. What is the tone of it? How does it speak to you? So we get clear on what you mean.
Well, let me just use the example of playing the piano, because I love to compose on the piano. So at this point, it's pretty simple. I will go to my piano, and sometimes if I have a lot of distractions, I will just start playing things just to get things out. You know, it's almost like, have you ever heard of automatic writing, where you write anything that comes into your head? Well, eventually, it develops some kind of rhythm, and sometimes, and a lot of times, it develops a theme and things like that. So let's say I go to my piano, and some days I play for a while, but almost every single time, it starts to line up and harmonize. And then once that happens, I surrender to it. And I guess as I'm surrendering, so does it surprise me. But there's a big element there. There's the element of having the humility to honor the greater will. And there's also the courage to trust that if we let go, something else will take over.
And also the wanting to receive. I mean, the capacity to receive all this great information. I mean, that's huge for us as human beings, isn't it? You must have increased your capacity to receive.
That's beautiful, because by nature I've always been a giver, and only more recently have I honored receiving, because to me there's nothing more aggravating than someone who can't receive that I want to give some love to. And it's like they don't want it. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, you don't want it. But we give people a gift, and we give the universe a gift by receiving what the gift is. Yeah. It's a gift back. Yeah. So yeah, that's a beautiful way to...
And it's a huge flow from the divine. When you're in this creation, you have to allow it. You have to be comfortable with this amazing thing flowing in. I mean, that could be quite scary. Or, you know, we've learned, I think, through growing up and... etc., to just push it away sometimes. And I think there we're at a stage where it's truly time to open up to this greatness, to this flow, to this universal flow. I mean, this is massive, I think. Well, because we have visions of that. We have views about that, you know, restrictive visions on it.
Well, think about the story of most people. When we're born and when we're young, most of us have the opportunity to be completely free. Mm-hmm. And at some point we're scolded and we're punished. Yeah. And we don't understand that. We were just being true to ourselves. So now starts the development of what some people call the ego, or whatever it is. It's another self inside of us that we assume is the proper way to be, but then there's the way we feel natural being. So all of a sudden we split, and now we're two people, and then the world constantly reinforces the being that should be, and not as much the being that we are by nature. Yeah. So, and as people vote on us, as we get approval. See, approval is a strange thing. It's like an election. You put out your character, and by nature, the more approval you get, the more votes you get. And then you self-elect the one that's most popular. And that's generally what people do, because people want to be accepted and loved and all of that. But really, if we have the courage, and I use the word courage a lot, because if we have the courage to trust the universe, to trust nature, trust the life force, trust divine will, whatever you want to call it, God, love, I mean, any name, it doesn't matter, because we can't put a name on it. If we learn to trust what's natural for us to be, just our being, trust our being. If we learn to let go and trust that, we're going to be surprised. And it's going to, we're also going to, we have to allow ourselves to lose control. It's kind of like an ecstatic dance. I mean, life can be that, you know, and of course, it's not always going to be pretty, but that's a judgment. Like, why is difficulty or sadness or tragedy, why are those bad? You know, we're cowards these days. We want to stay away from anything that's painful when we don't realize that, like a garden, you have to dig the soil in order to make a beautiful garden. And digging the soil is not really fun. It's dirty and it's a lot of work. Yeah. But going through our difficult times creates the depth for us to grow, always.
And miracles happen, huh? Tell us about your dad.
Yeah, this is an amazing story, and it's absolutely true. I'll try to keep it short for the sake of the interview, but the headline is that my father died of a heart attack last July, and when I came to the hospital, I had to make the decision to have them stop working on him because the doctor said we can really not much longer keep him, and if we did bring him back, his brain would be shot. Like he would be it said less than 1% chance that he could regain consciousness. And I said, well, I know what my father would want. He would want you to stop. So that was the decision I had to make.
Yeah, and you have a very close relationship with your dad.
Very. Yeah, I could tell you stories. But yes, no, we're really best friends too. So when I and his wife Nancy went in to see him, he was laying on the table and he was dead. I mean, there was no doubt about it. And everybody apologized, said we did the best we could, and I thanked them. And there was a being there that was not moving. I felt for his pulse, just being his son, I just wanted to be sure. But I looked in his eyes and he wasn't there. There was no question. So his wife and I stayed there for over a half an hour. I played him one of my songs. It was his favorite song. It was a Greek song. I had my iPhone with me. I took a picture of his face, his hands, because he looked so beautiful. The feeling in the room was absolutely serene. There was no drama in the room at all. Half an hour before, they were putting electric paddles on him. They were putting shots of who knows what into his heart. They were just trying to get him going. But all of a sudden, it was absolutely one of the most serene feelings I've ever felt. So to make the story short, about 25 minutes after he was pronounced dead, and I watched the doctor shine the light in his eyes, and his pupils did not respond, and I kept holding...
No more heartbeats?
Oh gosh, no, the heartbeat had quit long before that. But there was no more pupil response, and I was 2 feet away from him, and his chest wasn't moving, and I was feeling for a pulse, and there was nothing. So it was certain that he was dead. Well, what happened about 25 minutes after he was pronounced dead is that his Adam's apple moved. And I called the nurse and I said, is that a natural response after somebody dies? And she said, no. What was it? I said, well, stay here. And I was grabbing her hand, I was holding it. I said, watch. And sure enough, 2-3 minutes later, it moved again, and she just said, oh my God. And she screamed and got the other doctors and nurses in. They immediately put the monitor on him and said, we have a pulse. And then they put the mask on him, and he started breathing. Wow. And he recovered. Sure, he's a little weaker than he was. It was a really massive heart attack. However, I just saw my dad 7 months later. His brain is completely intact. He's funny, he's fun, he's charming, he's amazing, he's loving, he's kind. I mean, he's just an amazing guy. He's all there, and he was all there. They released him from the hospital 5 days later. And the medical report said...
Well, yeah, what does it say?
It's really funny. I wanted to see what it said. It's hysterical. It said at 4:08, patient was pronounced. That's what they mean by pronounced dead. They don't use the word dead. Was pronounced. At 4:35, patient miraculously regained heartbeat and respiration. I thought, that's a great word to use in a medical report. I haven't seen that yet. And the next paragraph said, son and wife believed that through their energy, they brought him back to life.
Well, we're breaking new ground.
I never said that. She never said that. Nobody said that. I don't know how that appeared on the medical report. I know it's hysterical, right? I'll tell you what other thing is fascinating about this story. Okay, that's fascinating enough. Yeah. So my dad is a living miracle. But here's what's even more fascinating. He does not remember from the moment he had his heart attack in the emergency room till 5 days later. He has no memory whatsoever except when he was out of his body. He remembers the feeling. He said it's the most serene feeling he's ever...
Near-death experience here.
Oh, it wasn't near death. This wasn't after death. I mean, it really was. He died. But he remembers being somewhere else, in another dimension. He said it was the most beautiful feeling he's ever felt in his life. He didn't have the big tunnel of light and all the people visiting him. He didn't have any of that. He said it was quiet, it was silent, it was dark, but he felt amazing. And he can't wait to go back. I mean, he's not in a hurry, but he says it's beautiful. And he wants people to know that wherever he went, if that's where they're going to go, it's really, really lovely. He talks. It would
be a great interview, too. Oh, my God.
Yeah, well, he still talks about it because he loves to recall that moment. But here, the point I was trying to make is where his conscious memory did not remember anything for 5 days, at the beginning of that, he vividly remembers being out of his body.
So how did that change your life?
You know, it's funny. I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked because I understand and allow things in my life to come from the quantum field. I'm not so rational where I don't believe in miracles or don't see them. I've seen several of them in my life. This was the most obvious. But I think life is a miracle. And I think that as a creator, when I walk up to my piano where there's nothing, and 3 minutes later there's a beautiful song, things happen out of nowhere that aren't logical. There was no precedent for that song. There was no precedent for my father coming back to life. It doesn't make any sense. But things are happening all the time in our existence that come from the unexpected, from the miraculous, from the infinite possibility that doesn't need to be rational or logical. We're very stuck in this brain. And so we require our world to be rational and logical most of the time. Otherwise, it scares us because it breaks our structure down. But breaking structure down is really beautiful because that's the only way we can expand.
Wow, Chris. I know we can go on for a long time in this conversation. It is absolutely beautiful and very inspiring to hear all of this and to get to know you more. And I'm sure even if you're well known here, some people are discovering new aspects of you. And I just love that about the interviews because it keeps on opening up. Is there anything else in part of talking of inspiration or how to truly live our creativity or something that you would like to say that we haven't mentioned that is essential in this process?
Thank you. I'll end where I started, and I want to remind everybody that you are creative in every moment. Your nature is creative, and our natural state as beings is to be inspired. So if you're not living an inspired life, you're not being true to your nature, because life it's surprising, it's complex. But the most beautiful thing is life is a constant unraveling of a mystery. So to be able to become fascinated with the mystery of what's going to happen next. Someone asked me the other day, a good close friend of mine who you know, Regina Meredith, she's a dear, dear friend of mine. She asked this question, she says, what do you love? And I said, I love the adventure of not knowing what's going to happen in the next moment. That is my first thing that came out of my mouth. And that is what I love. And whatever that is, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't always have to be pretty. However, I think life always wants to be expressed in its highest form. So the more we surrender, I think it's a more optimized way to have the fullest life possible. So that's what I want to say. And I want to reassure everybody that that is who we all are. Not just artists, not just privileged people. We all have access to that ecstasy of surrender and that fullness of living inspired lives, inspired moments, having inspired relationships. That's what's natural. The other stuff is not even natural. That's the stuff that happens up here that we're all confused about. So that's what I want to say.
Surrendering all the way.
Yeah. And so one thing I do want to mention, because people don't really know me anymore, I went from a process of sharing inspiration through mostly music, and I had a revelation, and I started doing workshops on inspiration. And so now I conduct workshops with the notion that I've expressed today in our interview to give people an opportunity to experience in a safe environment their own free expression and to start grounding the feeling of inspiration and freedom. Like if you experience it a few times and then a few more and a few more, you can start to develop critical mass where all of a sudden where you were more afraid or compressed or depressed or whatever, now you can be more inspired and free and enthusiastic and joyful and passionate and all of that. So I just want to mention it because it's a mission I've been put on. And until that mission stops, I'm very passionate about what I do.
Exciting. I can't wait to experience that.
I got a workshop in about a month. I'll invite you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I wish you amazing moments of inspiration and true bliss.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Why do you do what you do?
He's turning this around. I love it. I just love meeting people like you and sharing that with as many people as possible. This is truly inspiring. This is uplifting human spirits, and it's bringing up to higher vibrations, I think. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Big kisses to all of you Juicy co-creators from beautiful Sedona. Love you. Bye.